What up, everybody, and welcome back to the Top Cut Academy. I am none other than Professor Benji, back once again, bringing you another video on the Pokemon TCG. And after a long video that we made last time that was over an hour, thank you so much all for your support on that, by the way. It feels really great to get over 50 views on a video when I've literally just started. So loving the numbers coming in. Thank you for all your interactions, comments, likes and subs. So that is the first thing I want to say. But as I was saying, after making a video of that length, I thought we would touch on something a little bit more specific, a little bit more of a narrow topic today, and we will be talking about none other than Klefki. I think Klefki is going to be a real threat in the meta with Mega Evolution coming out. And why do I rate Klefki so highly right now? Now, instead of just reading this wall of text, why don't I tell you? I think we've moved into a format where several decks are really relying heavily on basic Pokemon abilities, whether that be early game to sort of get the setup, or whether that be late game, a draw, Mew, Pheasantipity, so on and so forth. And of course, we've recently just gained ourselves Solrock and Lunatone as well, which seems to be doing the rounds in a lot of decks at the minute. So Klefki obviously shuts down all of those, with them being basics. I think that Klefki can be really low maintenance in a lot of decks. Obviously, it does shut off your own abilities, and I think that that's a really key thing to keep in mind. Don't just go shoving this into things if you feel that it's going to hinder you just as much as your opponent, because that's not why we're playing it. We're almost using it as similar to a Wellspring Ogerpon using Sob or something like that, just to give us a little bit more time in the game. If Buddy's not something that we want to play or sort of fits well with our deck, Klefki is definitely something we can use to slow down our opponent and give ourselves a little bit more time. But what I mean by low maintenance is obviously Buddy Poffin, Nestball, or even Artisan can get this out onto your board and quite easily put it into the active, put something like an air balloon on this using your switches. Of course, you can move it into the active with Latias, but of course can't get it back out then because it does turn off your abilities as well. It obviously, pretty much what I just mentioned, works very well in your deck if you're not reliant on basic abilities. So I've found that this does sort of work really well with something like a Noctowl engine, a Pidgeot, something like that. Particularly I've been using this in Charizard at the minute, which is a deck I'm a really big fan of in this format, and Klefki seems to do the rounds very well in that deck. But some of the more specific reasons is obviously we can prevent late comebacks from opponents, which I will go into further in this video. It fits into some really strong archetypes already, as I just mentioned. Charizard, Dragapult can play this, Gardevoir can play this, stuff like that. So I think that, you know, if as long as you, as I said, build your deck so you're not too reliant on your basic abilities, this card can definitely be one for you. And let's check out some scenarios. So I'm going to go through some board states I've created, and I'm going to show you just how powerful Klefki can be in certain matchups against certain cards, and we'll sort of do a deeper dive on that. One thing I will say is I'm going to record each scenario individually, because I've created sort of these scenarios with lots of different pointers and stuff like that, and it's hard to remember all of that at once if I was to go through the whole video. So if you do sort of see you know, the video edited and jumping between each scenario, don't worry, I have sort of recorded them individually just to make sure I get the right amount of knowledge down for you guys. But without further ado, let's jump into the first scenario with Klefki. And here we have it, our first scenario, item lock. How about no? So one thing I want to note that these board states are sort of created with the opponent side of the board in mind. Don't pay too much unless I sort of mention it on our prizes, discard. It doesn't really matter what's in deck, what our opponents use, so on and so forth. I've just sort of created these board states and scenarios to give a quick example where Klefki can be powerful. So obviously just pay attention to sort of what's actually on the board, and you will see if I add anything to hand, I will actually bring in animations for that. So we have all been in this position. We are against, let's pretend Klefki isn't there and you're playing whatever deck you're playing. I'm sure you have seen Dragapult with this board state in their early turns. Now, of course, Dragapult, especially Slowpolt, without the rare candies was very, very reliant on getting Budu into the active and item locking to get those cloaks out and slowly burn into the game, and there wasn't a lot you could do because you were being item locked. So obviously that Droopy would often be swapped with the Budu using something like a Latias. So Latias using that Skyliner ability, switching out that Droopy for free, and obviously our opponent would then be able to attach to the Droopy on the bench. And as we know, Dragapult needs 2 energy to attack, a fire and a psychic. So the only way they can sort of jump over that hurdle is with the Shining Crystal or the Neo Upper Energy, which is much more commonly played now. So we know that Dragapult realistically needs 2 attachments, so being able to move out that Dreepy for free with Skyliner, get the Budu into the active and then attach to it is obviously very, very powerful. Now, let's put our Klefki back in, no longer playing your deck, we're playing Klefki in Charizard as it looks. And of course, if we take all that away and keep in mind that we have our Mischievous Lock, our Klefki is in the active, and basic Pokemon abilities are not working, it means that Latias can now no longer move that Droopy out of the active for free, which means that our opponent early on in the game is going to have to either use a boss. If we've already had a turn, we've got other things on bench, they can boss around Klefki obviously, but using a key resource and their supporter in turn with a boss, or of course they can attach an energy to Droopy and manually retreat, getting Budu into the active. But of course, again, not only if they used an energy to retreat using a key resource, it does then mean that their Droopy has no energy on it, which of course means that they need 2 attachments, they need to find a Neo Upper Energy, so on and so forth, which is going to be a lot more difficult for them to do. They would much rather be able to keep that energy on board and push on. So Klefki here, really, really good in the early game, as I said, stopping our opponent from getting into the ideal board state of Itchy Pollen. Now, a scenario using Goldengo EX. This is a no Lunar Cycle Zone. Good little wordplay there, I know, it's genius, it's great. So, Goldengo looks a little bit different this format from what is popular. I think that maybe there is still room to play that A-Spec, that Energy Search Pro, but for the time being, the most popular version before Milwaukee Regionals has happened is this sort of Solrock Lunatone version. So, again, sort of ignoring what's out apart from just showing what's relevant on their board. The only relevant thing on our board we're really concerned about is Klefki, and I thought this time it would be really helpful to look from our opponent's side of the board to see how this frustrating sort of scenario could play out. So we've got a Fighting Energy in your hand, and of course we would absolutely love to use Lunar Cycle with our Lunatone here to draw 3 cards, but unfortunately Mischievous Lock is in the active, meaning that Lunar Cycle no longer works. So, Goldengo then, you would imagine, cool, well, Coin Bonus is a stage 1 ability. That's no problem. We'll just get our Goldengos out, and obviously continue to draw from there. But, as we know, Genesect is what these decks are usually using to get their Goldengos out now. Lots and lots of lists opting not to play Ultra Ball whatsoever. So they're going to want to use Metallic Signal to get those Goldengos in hand, and then obviously put them down on their second turn. But we know for an absolute fact, well, not an absolute fact, but we know for a high certainty that they're not going to be playing any Ball Search cards, and they're very, very reliant on that Genesect. But without that Metallic Signal, that Genesect is not going to be able to grab those Goldengo. And now our opponent is stuck in this scenario. So we have got all the time in the world, realistically, to set ourselves up, get into our position to be able to take the first 2 prize knockout against a Goldengo, as opposed to them rolling over us and getting ahead very quickly. So the Klefki here, using very similarly to Dragapult using Budu, we are sort of using it early game to slow everything down a little bit, get ourselves into the game and take some key knockouts, maybe even on a Genesect if they start one, so on and so forth. So Klefki can be very, very, very powerful in this matchup. So next up we have our Squawk No C scenario. So obviously the deck we're choosing to highlight here is Ceruledge, but there are a number of other decks that want to sort of use Squawk ability early game, some more aggressive things. So you know, we've just talked about Lunatone, how Klefki is going to shut that down, so we don't need to sort of go through that whole process again. But For those who don't know, Cerulege, Abyssal Flames, 30 damage plus 20 for each energy in your discard, any kind of energy. So of course very, very synergistic with Lunatone, the fighting energy, the fire energy. So all they want to do is get those in the bin. And how do they want to do that? Well, they usually want to find Carmine turn 1 and use that, draw in 5 cards, and of course use Squawk ability, which with the Squawk and Seize ability can discard your hand and draw you 6 cards. So they're hoping by the end of their first, second turn, the discard looks like this, and they're going to start to roll through you quite quickly indeed. So we want to stop that as much as possible. So of course, getting that Klefki, for example, if we go first, or we just start it, very, very luckily, we're actually able to get the Klefki there, stop the Squawk and Seize, stop the lunar cycle, and then all of a sudden you'll find that Cerulege is sort of pulled away at the seams, because they play 20 plus energies, which is a lot, you know, that's a third of your deck. And so if you're not actually able to get rid of those, you start to dead draw quite quickly, because you're going to start seeing energy. Cerulege only takes 1 energy to attack, so you're only ever going to need 1 on there. Solrock, 1 energy to attack, only going to need 1 there. So there's really not many ways you can get rid of those energy apart from Ultra Ball, stuff like that, and that damage just isn't going to stack up as quickly. You're not going to scroll through your deck to find bosses, to take key knockouts, so eventually you're going to sort of force our opponent to have to go through this Klefki, which could set us up in a really nice position, because obviously we can draw off our Fez then once the Klefki's gone, and get into the game and maybe boss or take a key knockout on the Cerulege on the bench, on the Lunatone, you know, anything like that. So yeah, the Klefki once again stopping those sort of aggressive kick-off first turns, and we will highlight another one of the aggressive decks in Raging Bolt in our last scenario, and another sort of way that it can stop aggressive archetypes. But next up we have Terror Box. So here it is, our Terror Locks. Not box, locks, get it? Anyway, so our Terror Lock scenario. So this is actually one that I find really funny, because Terror Box, as much as you have Knocked Owl, which is a stage 1 ability, which you know you can sort of look at and go, well, that gets around Klefki really well, right? That's correct. But this time we're actually going for a late game scenario. So Klefki can be useful if you maybe go first, anything like that. You can shove the Klefki in the active. You can stop the Rotom early game. You can stop, you know, the Teal Mask Ogerpon drawing extra cards. But I think it's actually more effective in the late game, and that's because this deck is so reliant on basic abilities to actually draw cards. Now, this is the one time we're going to sort of use a scenario on the board. So as you can see, our opponent, forget our board, what's been played, nothing's been played, we've got nothing in our discard. But just imagine this is a scenario where the game is going on, our opponent's down to 2 prizes, we're on whatever prizes, we've got bench Pokemon, we've got all that, okay? But the main key point is our opponent is down to 2, and we are obviously going to be looking to Iona them. But while we Iona them, we can actually get our Klefki in the active, and as you can see on their bench, almost every single Pokemon on their bench needs an ability to do what it wants to do. Now obviously Rotom's already had an effect, it's done what it needs to do, it's got those cards, that no longer relevant. But now if our opponent wanted to attack with another attacker, well, Skyliner on Latias doesn't work, because Klefki's in the active. Vezendipity, they can't draw any extra cards because it doesn't work, because Klefki's in the active. Mew, lovely hand of 2 here, it would be great to restart up to 3, doesn't work. And finally, the Teal Mask Ogerpon, not going to be able to get any extra attachment, not going to be able to draw cards, because it's not going to work. So as you can see, you almost create a scenario here where our opponent needs to specific, you know, if they have a Hoot down, you know, they need to specifically see Knocked Out or a way to find that Knocked Out off those 2 cards, and they draw for turn, which is unlikely, of course. However, if they don't have a Hoot down, look at this scenario we've just created. We've almost said that all you can do this turn is hope to get a supporter off your top deck, otherwise you're attach passing, because Terrapega's got 2 retreat, you know, you can't Skyliner, you can't draw a Vezendipity, you can't draw a Mew, you know, none of these scenarios work, because Klefki, this 70 HP Pokemon, is just stopping the whole deck from functioning. And this can be really, really strong onto Terrabox, because we know that it likes to get ahead very early with Wellspring Ogerpon, take big effective knockouts, sort of destroying your board. Well, in the late game, you can do exactly the same back to them and push the wave back in the other direction. So really, really big fan of this, and I think this is sort of the times where Iona really shows her strength as well. We in a format, or have been in a format, where Iona and your opponent to 2 can feel pretty pointless with Pheasantipity, Mew, Teal Mask on the other side, Knockdown on the other side, but obviously putting on a little bit of a lock as well makes those 2 cards feel really, really painful, and it's very difficult for decks to function off low hand sizes nowadays. So a great example here of where Klefki can be effective in the late game. But now into our last scenario, as I said, Raging Bolt, where we can show sort of how we can skew their setup as well and get ahead and make them not so aggressive. And here is the slide, an unaggressive deck indeed. So of course, I've Klefki in the active, back to normal on this one, not really worrying about the board state or anything like that, just sort of trying to highlight how effective Klefki can be in those early turns against Raging Bolt. I would say if you are playing a Klefki, you might even want to go first in some of these matchups just to sort of slow them down, because a lot of their abilities on their basics specifically state they can only be used in their first turn. So how powerful is that to be able to take it away from them? So even here with the Crispin in hand, they can attach 2 to Raging Bolt. They're only doing 60 to our Klefki, because they're not going to be able to get a 3rd energy down, because Klefki's in the active. So we can straight away take away that scenario. But of course we know Raging Bolt, every single game, without fail, is going to want to fan Rotom, get their Hoot Hoots, get their Knockdown. But Klefki in the active, not going to happen. So straight away we take away that engine, and we've already sort of discovered that Knockdown makes Raging Bolt so much better to get those tutoring cards out to complete those big combos for your big knockouts. So taking that away from them, really, really strong indeed. And of course, as we already mentioned, shutting down that Squawkabilly. We know that Raging Bolt, similarly to Cerulege, wants energy in the discard. Squawkabilly takes that away. Sada does not come active very early, and so you completely shut down Raging Bolt on their first turn. And then, as I said, because these cards specifically state that they can't be used any other turn, that's it then. Those cards are down, those cards are done. Obviously, if our opponent notices we've got Klefki, they're probably not even going to bench these, and then you're in a scenario where they've got dead cards in the deck. Squawkabilly, not effective. Rotom obviously can hit for 70 at another point in the matchup, but for the most part, very, very down powered. And then we can go back to our turn and sort of have a little bit more time to set up against a deck that is usually ploughing through you every single turn, crisping, that doesn't sound right, does it? Soldering very, very early into the game and just taking key knockouts. But that's not possible now. You're going to have to take a little more time, which means we can, in fact, get into the game, which is so often taken away from us against a deck like this or Cerulege. So that is the final scenario. So thank you very much for tuning in to the Top Cut Academy. I am Professor Benji. I'm really happy to bring you some more content. As always, please like, subscribe, share. The overall goal of this is to get people involved, give them relevant information, and get them to learn a little bit more about the game, as well as yourself, whoever is watching. And I'm really, really enjoying this journey so far, making shorts, editing videos, doing this, and it's making me look into the format a little bit deeper as well. So yeah, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.